Welcome back to Swarzo History. In the last one, we talked about the history behind prosperity through victory, and in this one, we're going to talk about the Queen. And the Queen is Queen Margaret of Anjou. Over the course of the last few videos, I've mentioned that Queen Margaret was French, and the marriage between her and King Henry VI was part of an attempt at negotiating peace during the 100 Years' War between England and France. And then in the last video specifically, we talked a lot about the contention between Queen Margaret and Richard, the Duke of York, who is now presenting himself as a rival claimant to the throne. And in the last video, we talked about how this turned into an ongoing struggle between these two parties, the Yorkists and the Lancastrians. Queen Margaret is considered a Lancastrian in this context because she is fighting on behalf of the current state of the monarchy with Henry VI on the throne. Now, what's really important about these kinds of civil wars and domestic conflicts is that no one ever really comes and outright says, we are challenging the ruling monarch. There's usually something like the king is being influenced by bad counselors or what have you. And that's very much what this whole thing kind of starts out as. It's Richard the Duke of York saying that the king is being misled. One by Queen Margaret, two by the Duke of Somerset, which was her favorite, etc., etc. So even rebel armies marching against the royal army with the king involved, such as at the Battle of St. Albans, which we talked about in the last video, they always claim that they're not fighting the king. And this is interesting because what it means is that this conflict between the Yorkists and the Lancastrians, specifically between Richard, the Duke of York, and Queen Margaret, is really a fight over custody of Henry VI, the king. So the king himself, King Henry VI, actually changes hands several times throughout the 1450s. He gets taken prisoner after the First Battle of St. Albans, which we talked about. Things kind of go back to the status quo where he dismisses York as Lord Protector, and then he gets captured again at the Battle of Northampton by Richard Neville, the Kingmaker. Now, Richard, the Duke of York, did have a claim to the throne, but this was not something that you just say, well, I want to be king now instead of Henry. It was more or less an agreement or a fight over who would succeed the king after he died. So Queen Margaret wanted it to be her son, obviously. Richard, the Duke of York, said, well, no, when Henry VI dies, I want to become king as the heir. So that's another big thing that people are fighting over. And my song, The Queen, is about Queen Margaret's perspective on all of this. Obviously, Queen Margaret sees Richard, both the Richards, Neville and the Duke of York, as rebels, and that's what they are. And this fighting between these two parties goes on throughout the 1450s up until the Battle of Wakefield, and that happened in December of 1460. At Wakefield, the Lancastrians, loyal to Queen Margaret and Henry VI, ended up defeating the Yorkist army, and Richard, the Duke of York, dies in the process. Now, it's interesting because Richard, the Duke of York, was holed up in a castle, and for some reason he decided to sortie out, and that's when his army got crushed and he got killed. Many speculations about why that happened, but importantly, he died, his army loses, and a lot of prominent Yorkists also get captured and executed. For Queen Margaret, this was all 100% justified because the Duke of York had been rebelling basically for years, even though he was claiming to be supportive of the king and just trying to fix things. Because at one point he did come out and openly try to claim the throne for himself, but he couldn't really get anybody to back him on that publicly, so it was kind of crickets when he mentioned that. And that's when they came to that agreement where he would succeed to the throne after King Henry died. Queen Margaret never really bought the whole deal, so she wanted nothing to do with that and gathered an army, and Wakefield was the result. But Wakefield is pretty important because it brings someone else onto the scene, and that is Edward, the Duke of York's son. He is very, very, very angry about Wakefield and the death of his father, and he decides that he's going to take up his father's claim to the throne, and he's going to take it up right now. In other words, this is what sets the stage for the Battle of Towton only a few months later. And as we'll talk about in the next video, the Battle of Towton is one of the monumental events of this period, and we'll talk about why. And some notes about the song itself: it ended up being one of the heaviest songs on the album, and I liked making a Queen Margaret song that was just brutal. I really wanted Queen Margaret to come across as like ultra powerful in this song, because she really was. A lot of people consider her to be the power behind the throne during this period, and I think that's fair to say. Anyway, in the next video we're going to talk about the Battle of Towton and the big regime change that takes place as a result.